I just want to point out, too, that our friends from Trip Family Medicine are going to be joining us once more every Wednesday. We're looking at every Wednesday between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. And the goal is, in coming weeks, we're going to pick a topic, or perhaps you'll pick a topic, and we're going to address that. So if you have, in the future, going forward, we've had the introductory show today, but in the future, going forward, if you have questions for them on Wednesday mornings, they'll be here to talk to you about those health questions. And it can be, since they're in a family practice, they really can discuss just about everything under the sun. And so I'm looking forward to that coming up next week as well, right here again at 8:30 in the morning. What is next Wednesday? It's the 10th, or no, the 11th, right? It's the 11th, I believe. So they'll be back with us in 1 week. 9:07, Bill Colley with you this morning, 27 at our studios, News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And, of course, you can also reach me by email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That is bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. Also, I wanted to point out I have a number of things that I posted to Facebook at News Radio 1310 KLIX. Some of you may know that already, but I didn't know for sure that you all knew that we had a Facebook page for the radio station. But since the speech yesterday, the address by the Prime Minister of Israel, I posted a number of things related to that as well at our Facebook page. But there's all sorts of wonderful things there you can take a look at. In fact, I think Benito or someone has just posted a story about Bronco football. So you can check that out too as well. But a great resource. We have some updated stories there and just sometimes some rather tongue-in-cheek things we see in media. There's a story there about the Great Salt Lake, which may end up being empty by the time we get to the end of summer, which would mean it would be very salty, but it wouldn't be very lakey, I guess, if you're looking at it that particular way. Couple of things, speaking of that, that's environmental news. Couple of things related to that. Happened to see this on the AP wire this morning. Driverless cars. Now, I've seen a few of these demoed, and we're talking more and more all the time that Google is going to be coming out with a car in a couple of years. You will not need to be driving behind the wheel. I suppose that means you could be filing your nails, putting on your makeup, smoking if you still do that, nasty habit that it is, or you could be reading a newspaper or looking at your Kindle, if that's what your choice is, and the car would simply drive you wherever you're going. Some people say this would cut down on a great many of the accidents we had. You would be even more distracted, but the car would be doing all the work. And the computer in the car wouldn't necessarily be as distracted as you are, if you understand where I'm coming from with all of that. Idaho citizens, according to the Associated Press, could soon be sharing the road with driverless cars. A Senate panel considered a bill Tuesday that would allow companies to test self-driving cars on Idaho highways. The current bill requires, though, that the car's passenger be able to take control manually if something goes wrong. Now, see, this technology is so new, I tend to approve of that idea. And I tell you why. When I was taking driver's education, 37 years ago, been a long, long time. When I was taking driver's education, Don All was the name of our driver's education teacher. He would sit in the passenger side of the car, and I tell you what, this man always seemed to be the calmest guy. He would roll down a window, and he would just put his right hand out the window and just tip his right hand back and forth in the wind as you would be driving along somewhere. But we found out later on that he had a spare set of brakes over on his side. He could stop the car if he thought you needed to because, well, we were new at it. That is, we were just learning how to drive. So when you're in the early days of this technology, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a manual override available. But according to the writer, it says business groups argue that it limits progress of the cars, some of which already don't have pedals or a steering wheel. So how would you take control in that situation? I guess you just roll down the window and yell, "Gangway!" This might work in some instances. 11 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. And you can reach us at News Radio 1310 KLIX as well as newsradio1310.com, where we're heard around the world online at 736-0300. That number is 736-0300. I have a caller joining us. You're up next on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. I heard on the grapevine that there's 5 of those in beta testing right now in California, running 24 hours a day, just changing drivers. And they're just sitting there, and in case something goes wrong, but taking computer data to figure out what needs to be fine-tuned.
I saw a photograph, in fact, last week somewhere on a website, and it was not official, but someone believed that they had seen one of those, and from a distance of about 100 feet away, they snapped a picture of it while they were in traffic, and you could tell that this was something about the car was specialized because it also had a large contraption on the roof of it, which likely was part of the testing that was going on. And so even though it's not officially recognized, some people have seen these things out on the road, apparently moving around, and we have at least a few grainy photographs of them.
Right, but the leak from Google is that there's 5 of them on the road running 24 hours a day, already beta testing and collecting data to fine tune. So, and I don't doubt it. I mean, there's somebody sitting in it just in case something goes wrong. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. Once this thing's all tested and gets on the road, does computers ever falter? Yes. It's unbelievable. But I don't think half of the people out there listening to your show right now understand how much of their car is controlled by a computer and not you. There's cars out there with electric steering, electric brakes. All the throttles in the new cars have no cable on them whatsoever. You press on the pedal, it tells the computer what you're asking for, and it does it.
And I was thinking about the trip I made here a couple of months ago, driving a good part of the country on Route 80. When we get to the point where we have driverless cars, if you could program them, other than the need, I guess, to stop for a refill when it comes to gasoline, you could almost recline in the seat and sleep on the trip, and the car would just keep traveling along a major highway like that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the whole deal. What they're looking for is a computer-controlled car that will hopefully drop down, accidents that are human error. But there will be some that will be mechanical error. I mean, trains fall off of tracks and everything else. I mean, it just happens. And
unless it has a very good sensor and a deer jumps in the way, it doesn't really matter. Either way, you're still going to get the deer in your lap.
or in your passenger seat.
Yes. Hey, thank you very much. You can tell the deer welcome, then take him home for dinner. A little venison on the menu wouldn't be such a bad thing. 9:15:27 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com online. Speaking of some environmental issues, now I don't really know if the Great Salt Lake will dry out. It could, though, if a drought continues through the summer. But I happened to see this at the Daily Caller today. A new paper claims that declining solar activity since 1998 could mean falling global temperatures in the years ahead. Contrary to predictions of rapid warming made by virtually all climate models. We've had this discussion before. Solar activity may have more to do with the climate and weather that we experience on this planet than anything belching out of a smokestack in China, which is where most of the world's smokestacks are located anymore. They're not in Pittsburgh and Birmingham, England, and the places they used to be. The stagnation of temperature since 1998 was caused by decreasing solar activity since 1998, according to Jürgen Lang-Hein. He is a physicist with the German-based European Institute for Climate and Energy. From 1900 to 1998, solar radiation increased, but since 1998 it has diminished and could reach values similar to those of the early 20th century. A drop in global temperature over the next few years is predicted, he wrote. It even mentions that some people, the guy who came up with the hockey stick graph, is admitting that perhaps something like this may be having an impact on our climate and temperatures as well. And they are even open to the notion that the Little Ice Age, which took place from the middle of the 1300s to the middle of the 1800s, that was caused by a lack of solar activity. And if you ever saw the series on that, the series that was done on the History Channel with the late Edward Herman as the narrator, fascinating. The Stradivarius violin, for instance, may get its sound because of the way that the trees grew during that Little Ice Age, and that may have meant a more compact wood that was used when they cut it and then used it, shaped it into violins. And because of that, it may give it a very distinctive sound that a violin that is made in the year 2015 may not have. And there are all sorts of fascinating little details about that. The reason that in North America we have a beer drinking culture versus a wine drinking culture is because, well, at one time there were vines in England growing and people were drinking wine there, but the little ice age killed them all off. So the English, the Germans, and other Northern Europeans switched to brewing beer instead. And people didn't drink back in those days just to get all gussied up. They drank because water supplies were often contaminated. So sitting down and having a glass of mead or a glass of beer was one way to have something uncontaminated to drink with your meal. So they started brewing beer in the northern climate in Europe. They still had wine in Spain and in Italy and various places along the Mediterranean. But in North America, it was settled mainly by Northern Europeans, so they brought along beer because that by that point had become what they drank culturally. Fascinating things in that program. But for all of the folks out there who are warning about the end of the earth and the end of humanity and that we need to eliminate half the world's population and shut down industry and just have a few 100,000 elites left roaming the planet so that we can save it, perhaps they've gone a little overboard. And the writer at Daily Caller says scientists have struggled to explain why global temperatures have not risen nearly as fast as climate models predicted. Researchers have offered dozens of explanations as to why global temperatures have stagnated since 1998. And that's a follow-up to some of the things we were talking about the other day with the fact that we're still coming out of the last ice age after 12,000 years. But if the solar activity suddenly changes, we might not just get a little ice age. I think the greater fear for the planet, if you think about that, we can deal with global warming. You might have to move some populations here and there, and some people may have to leave some barrier islands where they currently live. Trust me, if you live on a barrier island, you can afford to go live somewhere else. I know that experience because I used to live near people. I lived a bit inland, but I didn't have to drive much more than a couple of miles and see the large beach homes that people were spending millions and millions of dollars on. Well, let me tell you something. They have the money that they can just pack up and leave if they need to and go find a new location. We can deal with that. The reglaciation, though, of North America would be something far, far worse that we would have to deal with. So between you and me, if I have to take one extreme or the other, I'm going to take the global warming. Coming up on 20 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you this morning. And the name of the program is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as our website where you can hear us anywhere, all over the world. That is newsradio1310.com. Coming up in a few minutes, if we get a chance, I'd like to mention a couple of stories I saw about atheism. Did you know, by the way, that there's one particular bit of research that says throughout the Arab world that 25% of the population now consider themselves atheists? But they can't admit it, because if they did, well, they might get themselves burned to death or crucified or find themselves hanging. Details on this coming up in just a few minutes. It's 20 after 9. We've been telling you for the last few weeks, if you're looking to pick up a little extra money around the house, maybe you have someone who stays at home but has a little time available where they could pick up some part-time work that would help meet some of the bills that you have on a monthly basis, or just put a little money away, or you just want to get out of the house and do something new and interesting, and also work with young people. Well, Western States Bus Services hiring part-time bus drivers right now, split shifts 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. We haven't had many of those this year. Trust me, they have them in other parts of the country, and they're expecting another big storm out east tomorrow with lots of snow. It was snowed so hard where my sister lived yesterday that she was telling me she actually fell in the snow, and she said she did not get hurt. It was so deep. And every time she tried to pick herself up, she'd put her hands down, and it would just they would sink into the snow. And then her neighbor tried to back into a driveway thinking he'd get out more quickly, ended up getting stuck, and it took him an hour to get out. We haven't had to deal with a lot of that in southern Idaho. And, of course, that means school days go on. So you wouldn't be sitting at home bored. If you were working as a bus driver, you would actually have something you could do. It'd get you out of the house much more frequently in this part of the country anyway. You can apply today if you have an interest in driving a school bus. The telephone number is 733-8003. That's 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. There was a story in the London Guardian. I guess it's the UK Guardian or the Manchester Guardian. It's an English newspaper. And now that it's online, it could represent all of those places. Are all atheists simply angry or just the ones to whom you're listening? I saw this yesterday. Didn't get a chance to mention it, but I had to mention it at some point. 9:26:27 at our studios. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story, News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com. He says he thinks atheists are angry, but he says scientists are disagreeing with him. The writer of the story is named Oliver Berkman. When the researchers recruited more than 1,000 students, determined their religious beliefs, then administered multiple tests to measure their disposition to anger, no correlation emerged. Assuming this is correct, he writes, why does the stereotype persist? That is, that when you meet an atheist, that they're always grumpy and angry and, that they try to take the moral high ground. They think that we're judgmental. Holy cow. Proponents of religion are undoubtedly guilty of demonizing those on the other side by pretending they're angry when they're not. And I agree. I do it myself. I think that in 12 years as a talk radio host, full-time talk radio host, I have yanked the chains on a few atheists more than a few times. Tends to get them to sit up and take notice, though. The writer says, but the angry atheist cliche is also another reminder of just how far the celebrity atheists have shortchanged the rest of us, apparently he being one, who identify more broadly with the causes of secularism and rationalism. Yeah, there's a good one. Because the new atheists really do seem unusually angry, and he cites Sam Harris and Bill Maher. And of course, Bill Maher talks all the time about Islam being one reason that we should drop religion altogether and just dump faith. Bill Maher, not a believer, of course, in God whatsoever. And he references this other fellow, Richard Dawkins, an Englishman, who has equated Roman Catholicism, raising children as Roman Catholics, with child abuse. Yeah, he was the guy. Ben Stein did a movie a number of years ago about God. Ben Stein went to interview this Dawkins fellow. I went to see it at some tiny little theater because it didn't get wide distribution. And I was watching the movie, and Ben Stein is interviewing this Richard Dawkins, the atheist, and says, well, then how did life begin? And so I can't do a good Ben Stein, and most people can. Dawkins looked at him and says, well, possibly on the backs of crystals. And Ben Stein looks at him and says, on the backs of crystals. And with that, Dawkins realized he was being mocked. And there's nothing a leftist or an atheist, and really they're synonymous. Maybe I'm being redundant when I use those words together. There's nothing that they hate worse than being mocked because, again, they're the smartest person who walks into any room, So Dawkins actually, I guess, threatened after the movie that he was going to file a lawsuit. Nothing ever came of it. Also, from Crisis today, Crisis, one of my regular reads, it's a magazine, and I get a couple of stories emailed my way every day in my email inbox early in the morning. Why atheists don't really exist. This from a writer by the name of Joe Bissonette. And he said that they can tell because they've interviewed scientists who claim to be atheists, and then when they are asked whether they approve statements like, quote, trees produce oxygen so that animals can breathe, unquote. When asked under time pressure, without having a moment to think about it and take into account their own biases, the scientists were twice as likely to approve of such statements. Well, what does that statement mean? Well, it means to say that the plants produce oxygen for the purpose of supplying animals, and that implies design, intelligent design, and therefore God. And he goes on to write, C.S. Lewis famously said that when he was an atheist, he did not believe in God, and he was angry at God for not existing, and pointed to the fact that there really are no such things as atheists. They're all looking for something. The trouble is, so many people expect that they're going to have that road to Damascus moment, where suddenly there will be a bright light, and you'll be asked, why are you persecuting me? And unfortunately, most of us just never get that. We have to take it on faith. Because if you have certainty, you don't need faith. So you have faith because you don't have certainty. I didn't originate that, by the way. That comes from the great philosopher, Craig Ferguson. It's 9:30 and 28 at our studios. Happened to see a story yesterday, and it sort of got obliterated because of all the media attention on what took place in the House chamber yesterday in Washington with a joint session of Congress listening to the remarks of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But I saw this video on Viral Buzz yesterday. They had a Muslim Day at the Oklahoma State Capitol. And as part of Muslim Day, there was an imam who began calling people to prayer in the foyer of the state capitol. So, as was going on, a woman suddenly walked up and she started reciting the Our Father. Quickly, state troopers grabbed her and dragged her away as she was reciting it. I guess they didn't want any trouble. So, yeah, it's one thing. Remember in Texas when you had people who were praying, and they were praying, I think, for the fate of little unborn babies. And then you had the Democrats starting to chant, "Hail Satan! Hail Satan!" And, of course, they booed God at the Democrat National Convention a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now, coming up on a full 3 years in Charlotte, North Carolina. These are things that you expect from that crowd. And while you had people who were praising Democrats who did not show up to hear Mr. Netanyahu speak yesterday, you can rest assured that 3 members of the Idaho State Senate are going to be vilified in national media because they skipped a prayer yesterday opening the day's business. And that was because it was done by a Hindu who came along and he did a prayer not only in English but in Sanskrit. He's not a resident of the state of Idaho. He's a resident of Nevada at the moment and may not even be a U.S. citizen. But 3 members, Republicans, decided to boycott the opening prayer yesterday morning in Boise. That will make national news because they will be called mean-spirited and bigoted, and that way the mainstream media can keep up the narrative that says Christians are just rotten people, and therefore we need to force them to do things they don't like. Of course, they don't force the Islamic population to do it because if you did that, the Islamic population would give you a poke right in the eye. That's a huge difference between the 2 different religious faiths. 9:36, Bill Colley with you this morning, 28 at our studios. The weather getting very nice before the end of the week. We will see gradual warm-ups every day going on now through the weekend, even by Monday when the temperature is 65 and still mostly sunny. There's no rain in the forecast, at least at the moment, until sometime in the middle of next week, so it will remain very dry. But by tomorrow, temperatures in the mid-50s and then broadening out into the lower 60s over the weekend and then into the mid-60s on Monday. So you're going to see some criticism nationally of what happened here in Idaho that will also fit in well with the narrative. You may remember there was a legislator a couple of weeks ago at the state capitol who was at a hearing, and he asked a woman a question. It was about women's health, and he asked a question whether or not certain things that were digested could come out a certain orifice. Except that was the orifice where babies usually come out versus what you eat after it processes comes out. And he was mocked roundly in national media. I heard a great comment about that. A writer at the National Review Online, which is the publication founded as just the National Review by William F. Buckley way back in the 1950s, said that got all sorts of ridiculous attention from national media. And he said there are so many other things we could be looking at that are far more important. But media covers it because they want to portray Republicans and Christians as being backward. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. What's up?
As a member of the Catholic Charities, you misrepresent everything about our Catholic faith. So please don't ever say you're a Catholic. Don't say you follow the teachings of the Pope. Because you're just a hatred, vile individual. Bye.
Hello? Am I going to get an opportunity to... There's no dialogue with these people, is there? Hit and run. Yeah, he may have been involved in a few drive-bys when he was younger. You never know. 9:38, Bill Colley with you this morning. News Radio 1310 KLIX. He always says, I'm an American citizen. Yeah, but where were you born? And how did that happen? Or did someone bring you here who shouldn't have been here? See, we don't know a lot about his history other than he's a very angry, angry man. And So here, all I'm telling you is what happened. What happened in Boise? I didn't condone it. I didn't condone these legislators boycotting the Hindu prayer. I know a little bit about that faith because I had a college roommate in graduate school who happened to be from Calcutta, India. But the fact of the matter is, I'm just telling you what happened. And I'm telling you how the media covers it. And you know what? Poor Libby out there, who's been paddled repeatedly by me on the air since I got here, beginning of January, he just can't take it anymore. His ego can't take it. And he just has to lash out and has to tell other people that he's a better Christian than they are. Why? Because apparently he drives the truck and picks up old couches for Catholic charities. 9:39. Bill Colley with you this morning. Hey, more of your telephone calls on the way. 28 at our studios. This is News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. How about all of those so-called Christians who apparently despise the Jews? We saw a good example of that yesterday in Washington, didn't we? Some of them, people like Nancy Pelosi, also claim to be Roman Catholics. Of course, she also believes in killing babies in the womb. Our caller may approve of that too as well. Yes, but they're better Christians than I am. You know, you think about all these people out there who tell you because you're not a liberal that you're not a good Christian. That liberation theology thing. That's actually Marxism, but let's just say your mom and dad come here from some other country and they drop you as an anchor baby so then they can go down and sign up for social services and have other people take care of them. Or somebody else has to pay your way through college. Somebody paid my way partly, and I'm very grateful for that. I never take that for granted. But think about that. We're dealing with people who believe somehow that they have been given the truth. And that, Joe Biden didn't attend this speech yesterday. Nancy Pelosi got up and stormed out and said she had tears in her eyes because of what that mean Jewish man was saying. These people should have been excommunicated from their church because they bring grave scandal to it because of their positions on killing little babies in their mommy's wombs. And yet it doesn't happen. John Kerry being another one. And yet they're just lionized by the left. And it's unfortunate, but they are trying to give the public, especially through media, the wrong impression about what faith really means. 9:45. Now, the caller has no idea how much I've given to charity myself over the course of a lifetime, or other things I've been involved with, where I've been involved with various charitable organizations, service clubs, and the like, just making a ridiculous and very stupid assumption. 9:45. Speaking of callers, we have a caller joining us. 28 right now at our studios on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. You're on the air.
Yeah, Bill, don't feel bad. That was Jill's best friend. And the only thing I ever agreed with whatever he said when he called was he called Jill Lovely Jill. Now, Jill was a lovely person. I just did not agree with her politics. But as a person, she was nice. And he was always nasty to Kelly and calling him every name in the book. And it's just, in fact, when he left, he called and told him not to let the door hit him in the crack on the behind, So I don't understand that. They claim they're religious. I want to know where in any form of religion or what they read brings them to the conclusion of liberalism, unless they're doing the same thing as these radical Muslims do, and they open a page, read one paragraph, and go, see, that fits my narrative, the way we go, without reading the whole chapter to figure out what it's about or what it was pertaining to.
Yes, and thank you for the call, and I'll agree about the comments about Jill, too, as well. I know some people, her politics may not have been their cup of tea, but she's done a lot of work in this community and for good causes. And if you lived next door to someone like Jill, you'd probably be happy to have Jill as a neighbor because she wouldn't be playing her music loud all night long and wouldn't be throwing her garbage all over the property either. You're up next. It's 9:47 with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
I was actually calling about the caller who was yelling at you for being Catholic and not being his brand of Catholic or something like that. Anyway,
yes.
Don't be too hard on him. He's one of 6 liberals in Twin Falls County, and we don't want to chase him off. It's actually pretty fun. I miss Jill, and he's pretty much the only liberal that calls in anymore. So don't chase him off, please.
Well, I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's got how shall we put it, some pretty good, strong beer muscles. Well, okay, coffee muscles this time of day. I don't have an issue with that. And you're right, we need to keep those 6 liberals around so people can at least see what one looks like and know better. We have another caller joining us. You're on the air. Good morning. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Good morning.
What's on your mind?
I used to think, I got to get away from the radio. I used to think Jill was putting on a show just to make an argument, but I asked around town people that know her, and she is that close-minded. I do not miss her at all.
Well, I thank you for the call. She was quite pleasant to work with around the office on a day-to-day basis, people off air. I was thinking about this the other day. I have a couple of old friends from way, way back who are fairly liberal. We just don't talk a lot of politics together, and we seem to get along just fine. And then I have a number of people that I do respect who are liberals. I got into a debate on the forum on WashingtonPost.com last week with somebody when I said the Post was a very liberal newspaper, referring to it as Pravda on the Potomac. And he cited a couple of conservative columnists they had, and then he criticized Fox News. But I pointed out Fox News employs Bob Beckel, liberal, Juan Williams, liberal. Who's the woman that used to work for Bill Clinton? She's the blonde, pretty blonde. She's on quite a bit. Liberal. There's the other fellow, Dennis Kucinich, liberal. And you know what? I like all of those people because they're really nice people, even though I wouldn't agree with them with what they believe in. Juan Williams did a wonderful column a couple of weeks ago in, I believe it was the Wall Street Journal, as a guest columnist, writing about Clarence Thomas and Clarence Thomas's importance to race in this country, as well as the Supreme Court. And I thought, wonderful to read that. He's keeping an open mind, which I think is rare among lefties. But yes, there are people out there who I actually genuinely like on the left. Even a couple of Muslims that I like. The King of Jordan, for instance, I think is a great guy. If every Muslim was like him, heck, we would have peace all over this world now, wouldn't we? Hey, coming up, Mike Huckabee, the Huckabee Report, brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. The telephone number is 736-6563. It's 10 minutes from 10 o'clock on KLIX. That guy was probably a liberal, too. 9:54, Bill Colley with you this morning, just for a few more minutes. On Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com, our website. And, of course, you can listen live there anywhere, all over the world. Rush Limbaugh will be along following news from Fox at 10 o'clock. And, of course, 3 hours of Rush, followed by 3 hours of Sean Hannity following 1 o'clock news. And after 4 o'clock news, Glenn Beck right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX. I was thinking about the nasty caller's comments about his work with Catholic Charities. Here's my experience. Some of these organizations that are known as Catholic really aren't terribly closely affiliated with the actual church. I cut my teeth as a broadcaster in Syracuse, New York. It's not my hometown, but I lived there for 15 years. Not consecutively, by the way. I moved away after 11 years, came back 4 years later, worked there another 4 years in talk radio, and then moved on. Can't stand the weather. When a city gets, 180 inches to 200 inches of snow every winter, I didn't want anything to do with that any longer. They had an office for Catholic Charities on one end of town, and a friend of mine used to joke. We were involved with Opus Dei at the time, which is a very, call it, conservative wing of the church. And he used to joke at the time that Catholic Charities was simply the office that had been set up because when Democrat Party hacks, whenever an administration got term limited at City Hall, and a new Democrat Party group came in and took over City Hall, the old guard had to have jobs. So Catholic Charities had been created in order to give them work. And you know what? I used to laugh when he would tell me that. Then one day I had to go to Catholic Charities. And when I got there, I ran into all these guys. Hey, Bill, how you doing? They were from City Hall. I hadn't seen them in 10 years. So he was spot on when he was telling me about that. It's a dumping ground for liberals. It's a patronage system, if you will, for liberals who can't find work after they leave office, and their henchmen who work in their offices too. It's just an opportunity to keep them working and keep them getting a paycheck, even if they aren't necessarily the people who are best at what they do. It's not about merit, in other words. 9:56, Bill Colley with you this morning. And 28 at our studios. It has been holding steady for a long time in the 20s this morning. Usually we warm up considerably faster, but we are looking for some very, very warm weather over the next few days. Mid-50s in the next couple of days, and then in the low 60s on Saturday and Sunday, 65 with a few clouds on Monday, and then perhaps finally some rain sometime in the middle of the next week. We dodged the bullet on the snow yesterday. I'll get that out sooner or later. I've been up since 1:30 this morning. That's what you call dealing with sciatica. Sometimes you just can't sleep. And that means your tongue has to go back home, take a nap, and get back in gear for another day. But I was going to point out, and I lost my train of thought. Wouldn't you know it? Well, there you go. But we are going to have some rain maybe next week. And yesterday they had snow in places like Salt Lake City, about 3 inches, and they actually had snow out near Burley. And we just managed to avoid it all. And that snow stretched all the way across the country, heavy in spots. And in fact, down through when you got east of the Mississippi, some of that snow still down in the deep south. So a lot of people still dealing with what has been a miserable winter. We have no complaints, other than the fact it's very dry. We hope to see that turn around, of course. And a friend of mine from California said the other day, they're just saying prayers now. It's funny, when people get to that point where you're finally turning to God, maybe there's a reason you have the drought, to bring you a little closer. But then what would I know, as the caller says, I'm just a phony when it comes to being Christian. News is next. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. God willing and the creek don't rise, I'm back here tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Hope to see you here.